Everybody. Oh, please, a little bit more enthusiasm. Good morning, everybody. It's really good to be with you all this morning at church, and great to be with you if you're with us online as well. Welcome to you. My name's Luke. I'm a curate here at Ascension, and we just read one of my favorite chapters in the whole Bible, Luke 15, or almost all of Luke 15. We'll be coming back to the end of it next week, I think. Stories about lost things, lost coins, lost sheep, and a lost son. I want to focus on that last bit today, the story of the prodigal son. Now, I've been doing a little bit of research over the past couple of weeks. I've been going around to people I've happened to meet, and I've been asking them this one simple question. What does the word prodigal mean? Prodigal. Can you put your hand up if you think you know what prodigal means? Okay, 1, 2. For the benefit of people tuning in online, only 2 people just lifted their hands up. It's a weird word, isn't it? Here are some of the 3 people. Here are some of the answers that I got given. Prodigal means lost. Prodigal means someone who goes wrong but then comes back again. Prodigal means wayward. Prodigal means loved. Prodigal means sinful. Prodigal means being naughty and then taken back. Prodigal means returned. These are all wrong answers. Sorry to all of those people. One person, only one person, got the answer right. And I'm very proud to say that that one person was our very own vicar, Marcus Gibbs. Shall we give him a clap? Well done, Marcus. So what is the right answer? What does it mean? Well, the word prodigal actually means lavish or extravagant. It comes from a Latin word, prodigus, which means lavish. So in this case, it refers to the son's wild living. That's a quote from the text. The son went off and squandered his money in wild living in a distant country, squandering his inheritance. His behavior is prodigal, lavish, extravagant. Now, for whatever reason, Jesus' parable about this son has basically stolen the word prodigal. It's totally commandeered that word for itself, so that you'd never use that word in any other context. It's a bit like compare the market and meerkats. Compare the market have basically just stolen meerkats of themselves, so that whenever you see or think meerkat, you think compare the market. Incredible branding and advertising, but it's a bit like that with the prodigal son. You think the word prodigal, you think of this story. But here's the weird thing. The word prodigal isn't there in the text. It's not in the Bible. It's just an accident of history that one day, one interpreter of the Bible decided to call it the story of the prodigal son. And for whatever reason, that title has just stuck, even though it's a word we never use. So that's what we call it. That's what we know it as, the prodigal son. But I don't think it's a very good name for this parable. Henry VI, Part 3, a fine play by Shakespeare. Not a great name, not very catchy. Kidulthood. Anyone seen Kidulthood, the film? Yeah, a few of us. Quite a good film, not a great name. Obi-Wan Kenobi, great Jedi, not a great name. Dull, a little village where Katie and I go on holiday sometimes in Scotland, in the Highlands. It's called Dull. It's a wonderful village. Not a great name for a village. Deathshed. Amazing home movie created by me and my 9-year-old friend back in the year 2000 about someone who gets killed in a shed. It was one of the best home movies ever made. Not a great name. And I could go on. There are so many examples, but what I want to say is that the prodigal son is a great story, perhaps one of the greatest stories in the Bible, if you're allowed to have favorites. But it's not a great name. In fact, it's a bad name. It's an actively misleading name because it distracts us from the awesome, triumphant, life-giving point of the story. Jesus is not telling us about a prodigal son. Jesus is telling us about a prodigal father. What you have before you here, ladies and gentlemen, is the Bible story you never knew you knew. The story of the prodigal father. Let me show you what I mean. Perhaps we can get Jesus' description up. It's, I think it's verse 13. Could we get back to chapter 15, verse 13? I'll read it for you. This is how Luke describes the prodigal son's behavior. He squandered his wealth in wild living. He squandered his wealth in wild living. That's it. That is a mere 6 words in the Greek text. I want to suggest to you that that is not the centerpiece of this story. It's not the centerpiece, and it's not actually a very remarkable thing to happen. A newly rich young man wasting his money. It's quite predictable, if anything. Now, in contrast, could we go forward a few slides to verse 20 onwards? Contrast that to this description. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate." That's the centerpiece of the story. That's the part that's meant to grab our attention. That's the prodigal behavior, the over-the-top extravagance that Jesus wants us to notice and say, wait a minute, what? He's acting like that? Here is a father who has been snubbed and rejected by his son, whose son has effectively said to him, "Dad, can't you just hurry up and die, so that I can get my money and get out of here and never see you again?" And then when that son returns, the father is not angry. The father is not bitter. In fact, the opposite. He's so extravagantly, stomach-churningly happy that he sprints down the road to embrace his son and doesn't even hear his son's apology because he's so busy thinking about, how are we going to get this party started as quickly as possible? All right, get the robe, get the ring, get the fatted calf. Let's get this party started. This father is prodigal. Commentators have picked up, and perhaps you've heard this before, on the detail that in verse 20 the father runs, and they point out that in the culture of the first century in Palestine, for a grown, respectable man to pick up the hems of his garment and run in public would have been really unacceptable, shameful and embarrassing for him. But the prodigal father is so extravagantly happy and relieved that all his inhibitions just go out the window, and he's doing it. He's running. He just runs. Now, I don't think actually much has changed since the first century in Palestine and 21st century London. We adults, we don't run, do we? We still don't run, generally speaking. Unless you deliberately put on your jogging clothes and head to Clapham Common, or unless you're in the vicinity of a train station, you don't run. You don't see grown-ups running. It's not the done thing. It's embarrassing. Imagine if you saw Reverend Marcus in his clerical collar running down the street outside. You'd think, yes, that wasn't planned. He was just, right. But what is your first thought? It would be, oh my goodness, what's the matter? Has there been an explosion? Is it Godzilla? Should I be running too? And if you found out that he was just doing it for fun, then you'd think, oh, what a weirdo, people don't run. Katie and I were in the park last week, And there was a lady in her jogging gear stretching by a tree, sort of up against a tree with her leg up like this. And then our eyes scanned about 50 meters to the right, and there was a man also stretching in a full suit and tie. And we did a double take. We thought, what's he doing? Is he making fun of this lady, or what's happening? But no, he was just genuinely stretching in quite an elaborate way and quite a theatrical way, stretching his legs out in his office suit in the park. And I'd just been reading Luke 15 and thinking about this idea of the prodigal father, and I thought, Father God, is that a little bit what you're like? Jesus tells us this parable because he wants to show people what God the Father is like. He wants us to get just how unashamedly, unembarrassedly, that's a word, happy God the Father is when people return to him. As unashamed as a respectable man in first century in Palestine picking up the hems of his garment and running down a dusty path at the sight of his long-lost son. As unashamed as a respectable man in his office suit going to the park for a stretch. The next time you see someone doing something shamelessly weird in public, be reminded that God the Father is prodigal, is like that, is totally uninhibited in his reaction towards those who come back to him. But for me, the really wonderful thing about this passage is that Jesus isn't just talking in the abstract like that. He's not just saying, this is what God's like. This isn't like a theology lesson. Jesus is telling this parable in a real place to real people. People who are literally sitting next to him. He's on his way from Galilee to Jerusalem. A journey of about 4 days, or at least 4 days. And there's a caravan of people going with him through villages and towns and wilderness. And as he goes, Jesus visits different houses, he tells stories, he meets people, he heals people. And it's at some point on this long journey to Jerusalem that Jesus finds himself eating with disreputable people, tax collectors and sinners, the text says. In verse 1 to 2, perhaps we could head back to verse 1 to 2 on the screen. It says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, 'This man welcomes sinners and eats with them.'" Imagine for a moment that you are one of these people eating with Jesus. And let's really do this. Maybe just close your eyes just for a minute. Close your eyes and imagine you are one of these people. You are one of these people. You are a sinner. You are not perfect. You are not good. And to make it worse, the people around you know what you're like. And they're muttering about you. And you feel ashamed. But nonetheless, here you are, resting on the wayside of a rough track somewhere high up in the Judean hill country, a big fading sky above you, an endless wilderness terrain around you. And you've somehow, amongst all the people, found yourself sitting here with Jesus, the healer, this miracle worker who everyone's following. Jesus overhears the people nearby muttering about you. He looks up and motions them over. And when he has a bit of an audience, he starts speaking, telling stories. And you listen. You listen to Jesus talk about a lost sheep, a lost coin, a lost son, a shepherd rejoicing, heaven rejoicing, a woman rejoicing, angels rejoicing, a father running, hugging, kissing, partying. So much happiness. And then as you sit there looking at him, it suddenly clicks. You realize Jesus is talking about you. These stories, Jesus is telling you how happy he is that you are with him. You, the tax collector, the sinner, you, the liar, you, the cheat, the adulterer, the betrayer, the glutton, the self-hater, the angry, the anxious, the depressed, the violent, the empty, the lost. You are the sheep. You are the coin. You are the son. And Jesus is the shepherd, the woman, the father. And you realize just how very happy Jesus feels about you. Why don't you open your eyes now if you had them closed? Jesus told these parables not as abstract lessons about God. He told them so that the people sitting literally next to him would grasp the immense prodigal happiness and relief that Jesus and his Father in heaven have at the fact that they are sitting next to him right now, that they're found, that he's got them. And the good news for us is that Jesus was not content to let it stop there. A small group of lost people gathered around him on the way to Jerusalem. No, Jesus wanted everyone. And that's why he died on a cross. The cross is like Jesus picking up the hems of his garment and running towards death, complete loss, so that he could claim all lost things and all lost people as his, as found, claim those who are dead as alive. That was the prodigal father's will that Jesus accomplished. I want all of them. I want every last lost person. And that includes you and me today, which is really great news because today, this morning, we're really lost, aren't we? Just on a scale of, I don't know, that's really lost and that's, you're not lost at all. How lost are we feeling this morning? I'd say I'm probably about here. Okay. We've got about an average of this. I'm going to say that's about 3 out of 4 lost. Because we're facing this new national lockdown in a few days. And it's just a reminder that as individuals and as a nation, we're lost. We are in trouble. And we've been thinking about God's perspective on health recently over the past weeks. And I think this story is a bit of a check on the conversations we've been having. Because it reminds us that as much as we want to be healthy, God's perspective on our health is that he knows that we're all really unhealthy. Mentally, spiritually, physically, financially, environmentally, you name it, humans have broken it. We've missed our chance. The moment's gone. We've lost it. We are unhealthy. And just look where we are today, facing a second lockdown. We bottled the first one. We bottled our first attempts, and here we are going again. But the great thing about Jesus is that he came for people just like that. He came not for people who are well, but he came for people who are unhealthy and in need of help. And perhaps the most basic way of practicing healthy living is, when you're sick, go and see the doctor. Don't just sit at home and suffer. Make an appointment, go and get it checked out with the doctor. And it's the same when you're a Christian. Make regular appointments with the doctor, Jesus. But what does that look like? I think it looks a bit like the little scene that we imagined unfolding in Luke 15. Tax collectors and sinners, lost people, gathering around Jesus, becoming aware of Jesus and his Father's prodigal happiness and delight and forgiveness for them. And that scene, I suggest, needs to play out in your life regularly. If you're already a friend of Jesus, you can trust that you are saved, you're found. Your eternal destiny is secure with God. But why wait for the end of the world when you can taste God's prodigal happiness with you today? And that might look like anything as simple as 10 minutes sat on your sofa each morning. It might look like a bike ride in the park where you say, right, I'm going to cycle and I'm going to pray. It might look like using a prayer app like Lectio 365 or Take Time. Basically, any way you can create space and time to deliberately come into the Lord's presence, do it. And do it regularly. It's never going to be too late, so you don't need to worry, but you may as well start now. I think especially now as we have another 4 weeks of probably a bit more space and time ahead of us. This is something important that you need to do. Make appointments with Jesus to learn how happy and delighted he is at you. And we're actually going to do that now. It's a real privilege today that we have a chance to share communion with each other. This is the first time we've done communion, I think, for 7 or 8 months. And communion begins with, well, can anyone tell me, what's some of the first words that communion begins with? What's it called? Confession. Thanks. Communion begins with confession. That's you acknowledging that you're lost and unhealthy and in need of a doctor. And when you take the wafer of bread, having made that confession, you can simply remember those tax collectors and sinners breaking bread with Jesus out in the Judean hill country. And you can take that moment with that bread to talk with Jesus, to listen to him, just like they did. Or just simply become aware of how happy he is to have you there with him in that moment. A lost person back with him, found. And enjoy that happiness that he has for you today.